Welcome to CP Voice. Today's guest is the former senator of Pennsylvania and a 2012 Republican presidential candidate. He's here today to talk about a brand new documentary titled One Generation Away that deals with the eroding of religious liberties in America. Please welcome Rick Santorum.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
How's everything?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So what's One Generation Away about?
The title comes from a speech that Ronald Reagan gave back in 1961 called A Time to Choose. And the longer quote is, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." Every generation has to fight for it. And I think we sort of feel that in America today with respect to, I think, the foundational freedom, which is the freedom of conscience, the freedom of religion. I think our founders considered our first freedom, because if you don't have the freedom of religion or the freedom of conscience, then all these other freedoms really don't stack up to very much. You can speak as long as you don't speak what you believe, or you can assemble but not for what you believe in, or you can, have freedom of the press, but you can't write about freely about your conscience. And so it is the foundational freedom, and it's one that really for the first time in American history is under direct assault. And we chronicle that in the film. We take 7 different little vignettes of where religious persecution is happening in America today, and we highlight where it's coming from, what it's about, why it is counter to what our Constitution believes, and why it's counter to what's best for society. And we hear from both sides. We hear from the people prosecuting the cases. So we hear from people like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, or the People for the American Way, or the ACLU, and the Southern Poverty Law Center. We hear from all of these folks who term some Christian groups as hate groups because they're Christian, and are trying to erase any kind of God or Christianity in particular from the public square. And then we hear from the other side. We hear from the lawyers that are defending these cases to people like Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, or Tony Perkins and Eric Metaxas from here in New York. And it's a lot of really strong voices on both sides.
So why do you think there's such an attack on religious liberties in America?
I think because for several reasons. Number one, as the government gets more and more involved in things, the government wants to tell you how to live your life. And whether it's here in New York, where you can't buy sugared sodas at in your schools, or at least they attempt to try to do that, or you can't say or do certain things that may be quote offensive to some people. You can't have any kind of Bible instruction in your schools. All of these things is the government now, because they're in the education field, they're in regulating restaurants, or they're in regulating businesses. Now they're telling you they're in the health insurance business. They're going to tell you what your values should be, and they're not going to be tolerant of any dissent. So they know what's best, and if your values disagree with the predominant secular value of the day, then you lose. Because we have secular values, therefore they're not religious, though they're permitted. You have religious values, they're not permitted. So we allow any kind of secular values out there in the public square, as long as there's no faith attached to it. But if you have any kind of religious values, no, we're going to say that you don't have a right, which is the antithesis of what the First Amendment says. The First Amendment guarantees the free exercise of religion. And what they're saying is, no, you don't have the free exercise of religion. Religion is a private matter, and you can only exercise your faith within the walls of the church or in your own home, and that's the fundamental rub.
So why is this an important cause for Christians to rally behind?
Yeah, well, because if we don't nip it here, then things get a lot worse. I used the term earlier in our conversation describing what's going on in America as Christian persecution. I almost, when I say that, I generally step back from that and say, persecution here in America is fairly mild compared to what's going on, obviously, in the Middle East, and we've seen the beheadings and the mass murders and the burnings of churches, and so you got to use that term very much advisedly. Nothing like that is happening here in America, thanks be to God. But things weren't always that way in other areas of the world either, and that it starts with a gradual erosion. You don't usually go from 0 to 60 in a matter of a few days when it comes to religious persecution. It's something that grows over time. And Eric Metaxas, who is very prominent in this film, talks about Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany. And at the time, when Bonhoeffer began to speak out about this, people don't realize that Germany, prior to the Nazis getting there, was a very religious country, was a very Christian country, was a very sophisticated country. I mean, very advanced civilization, very erudite group of folks who were running it, and the idea that you could have this type of religious persecution take place over a period of 10 years. We'd go from Christians, Jews, obviously, but also Christians being not just persecuted but put to death, is like Bonhoeffer himself was unfathomable. I mean, you wonder sometimes, why didn't the Jews see this and move? I mean, couldn't they see it? It was unfathomable to them that a country like this could happen. Same thing here. I mean, you think it's just impossible for that to happen in America, and maybe it is. But maybe it isn't. But what we do know is that if we continue down this path, that things are not going to get better, and that the chance of something really bad beginning to happen, where your faith is really constrained, or your lives are really in danger, becomes a possibility down the road.
Now, with that being said, do you think we're headed towards a time where the government will dictate religion totally?
I think you're seeing evidence where the government is intolerant of certain biblical teachings, and they're putting constraints on that. And for example, take up in Boston, and you have the Catholic Charities in Boston who refused to do gay adoptions when same-sex marriages were put in place. And so here's Catholic Charities, which is one of the great purveyor of services up in Boston, being told that you're not eligible for government contracts because of your position on adoption. Right. So they got out of that gay adoption business so they could keep everything else going. And then there's going to be the question as well, we don't like your position on excluding certain people from hiring because there's inconsistent with your tenets and teachings of your church. Well, then you're going to be told, well, you're going to lose your contracts there, or we're going to deny your tax-exempt status, or these things are beginning to happen, and so it's a gradual erosion, saying you either conform to what the government says you have to believe in, or you're going to lose certain privileges. And where do you go from conform to lose, because you're going to lose privileges if you don't conform, to you're going to lose rights if you don't conform? And it's not a very big leap from saying, well, we're not going to give you a contract, and we're not going to let you figure out whatever else it is that we're not going to let you do because you don't conform to what the government says you have to do. And those are real threats. If you go to other countries in the world where you see less religious liberty here, at least it's even like Canada, where pastors are being prosecuted for hate speech because they don't agree with certain things that are now the secular values that are articulated in Canada. Could that happen here? Of course it could happen here if we are not vigilant. And that's really the call of this film, to be vigilant. We're not in a dire situation right now. But that doesn't mean we can't get there, and I would argue there's a certainty that we will get there unless we push back and defend our liberties.
What do you say to critics who are saying, well, we're just protecting the rights of the individual, or we're just trying to promote equality for everybody? What do you say to people like that who would defend some of these things that you're touching on in the new documentary?
Equality for whom? It's equality for the, people have a right to believe what they want to believe, but they don't have the right to force you to believe or force you to do things that are against your beliefs. And so this is not really an issue of equality. It's an issue of conscience. Is it proper for the government to require everybody to adhere to a certain set of values and principles? Well, in some cases, yes. Clearly, yes. I mean, do we believe in taking an innocent human life, murder? No. And there's a set of values and principles the government will hold you accountable for. The lines that the government is drawing as to what their value structure is antithetical to biblical truth and natural law. And in those cases, we have every right to stand up and say, no, this is an unjust law. This is not conforming with truth, and we're going to fight it. And there are cases like that today, for example. I mean, look at abortion, for example. There are people who continue to fight that abortion is the taking of innocent human life, and that we are going to continue to fight against that and try to do something to change the laws. And these are moral struggles that are tensions that, again, the government and the people are constantly. I always go back to Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he talks about just laws, and in his case, he was saying that the discrimination that's going on in America at the time was unjust laws, and we don't have an obligation to obey unjust laws. So we have an obligation to fight those laws, do so peacefully, do those with respect, but we have an obligation to fight them, and so that is the case here today.
Interesting. It's been great having you on today, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For more information on One Generation Away, visit onegenerationawaymovie.com. For any questions or inquiries, email us at cpvoice.christianpost.com. Thank you for watching. Rick Santorum believes strongly in the erosion of religious freedoms in America, and is combating it with his documentary, One Generation Away. He also believes Christians need to be aware of what's happening, and to consider the possibility that the U.S. could become a nation that persecutes Christians somewhere down the line, if things do not change.
Mount Soledad has always been a focal point for the city of San Diego.
It's probably one of the most beautiful memorials we have in this country. It's been there for a long time until it was attacked by the ACLU, saying you can't have this memorial up here, it's federal land. Think of the precedent that sets.
And I'm wondering, when is the lawsuit going to happen that will force us to go to Arlington Cemetery and take down every cross in Arlington?
What do you do with the crosses and stars of David and religious symbols that are in every community of every state of this country?
It is not the government's job to determine which symbols of faith are appropriate and proper, and the Constitution expressly forbids Congress from getting involved, making a law that would be an impediment to anybody's expression.
I don't know of any veteran that I've talked to who's indicated, yeah, that cross has to come down. They like the memorial as it is, and they want it to stay as it is.
Nobody would have thought America could have changed this much in the last 5 years. No one could have predicted this.
It is happening. It will continue to happen. It will heighten. There will be a price to pay.
It's not going to get easier, period. And so the church is going to have to navigate some very, very difficult waters here in America, because we're not used to having our religious freedoms infringed upon. And how we respond to that in this critical time, it's radically important.